Jimin and Jungkook had always been the kind of people whose connection could be felt long before either of them entered a room. To those around them, their bond seemed effortless, built over countless shared mornings, exhausting rehearsals, quiet celebrations, and difficult nights when only silent companionship could ease the pressure they carried. RM often noticed how they instinctively searched for each other whenever uncertainty filled the atmosphere. Jin teased them for understanding each other's thoughts without exchanging a single word. Sugar quietly admired the trust that allowed them to lean on one another without asking for permission. J-Hope believed their friendship was the emotional center that kept everyone moving forward, while Taehyung watched them with a smile that sometimes carried an emotion even he struggled to explain. Together they formed a family strengthened not by perfection, but by choosing each other through every challenge that life unexpectedly placed before them. From the outside, everything appeared exactly as it had always been. Their schedules remained demanding, cameras continued following every performance, and endless expectations surrounded every public appearance. Behind every smile, however, the weight of exhaustion slowly settled deeper into their hearts. Success brought admiration from millions, yet it also created invisible walls that prevented honest vulnerability. Every mistake felt larger than life. Every misunderstanding seemed impossible to escape. In that overwhelming world, Jimin had become the person who quietly carried everyone else's burdens before even acknowledging his own. He constantly checked whether the others had eaten, rested, or recovered after difficult days, often forgetting that his own heart had begun carrying cracks no one else could see. Jungkook noticed those quiet sacrifices more than anyone realized. He often caught fleeting moments when Jimin's bright smile disappeared the instant nobody was looking. There were evenings when Jimin lingered alone after everyone else had returned home, staring silently through studio windows as city lights flickered beneath the night sky. Whenever Jungkook approached, Jimin would effortlessly replace the sadness with gentle warmth, convincing everyone that nothing had changed. Each reassuring smile succeeded in calming the people around him, yet it left Jungkook increasingly unsettled. The comfort Jimin offered others seemed to come at the expense of his own happiness, and that silent imbalance slowly planted an uncomfortable fear inside Jungkook's heart. At first, the changes were almost impossible to recognize. Conversations became shorter. Shared laughter faded more quickly than before. Their familiar routines slowly drifted apart as unexpected responsibilities created distance neither of them intended. Whenever Jungkook reached out emotionally, something invisible seemed to stop Jimin from meeting him halfway. It was never coldness, never anger, only a quiet hesitation that felt painfully unfamiliar. The more Jungkook tried to understand, the more unanswered questions accumulated between them, transforming harmless silence into growing uncertainty that neither of them knew how to break. Unknown to everyone else, a single hidden decision had already begun changing everything. Jimin believed protecting Jungkook meant carrying a painful secret completely alone. Every day he convinced himself that silence was an act of love rather than betrayal, unaware that every secret creates shadows where trust once lived. While the others celebrated another successful chapter together, fate quietly prepared a collision that would test every promise they had ever made to one another. Neither Jimin nor Jungkook realized that the smallest misunderstanding was about to become the beginning of the deepest regret either of them would ever experience. The following days unfolded with an unsettling rhythm that no one else seemed to notice. Every rehearsal continued as planned, every meeting ended with polite smiles, and every public appearance looked flawless under the bright lights. Yet beneath that carefully maintained routine, an invisible distance continued to stretch between Jimin and Jungkook. It was not created by arguments or obvious resentment, but by countless moments left unfinished. A glance that lingered too briefly. A message that remained unanswered for hours. A reassuring smile that never quite reached the eyes. Those tiny cracks, almost impossible to see on their own, slowly merged into something neither of them could ignore anymore. Jungkook began questioning memories that had once brought him comfort. He replayed every recent interaction in his mind, searching for the exact moment everything had started to change. The uncertainty became more exhausting than any demanding schedule. He wondered whether he had unknowingly disappointed Jimin, spoken too carelessly, or failed to notice a silent cry for help. Every possibility led to another unanswered question, leaving his thoughts trapped in an endless cycle of guilt and confusion. The stronger his desire to protect their bond became, the more powerless he felt against a problem he could not even identify. Meanwhile, Jimin carried a burden that grew heavier with every sunrise. Hidden beneath his calm expression was a promise he believed he had to keep at any cost. The truth threatened not only his own peace but also everything Jungkook had worked so hard to build. He convinced himself that distance would hurt less than allowing Jungkook to become entangled in consequences he never deserved. Every step backward felt like a sacrifice made out of love, even though each step quietly broke his own heart. The loneliness became almost unbearable, yet he refused to let anyone witness the weight pressing against his shoulders. RM noticed the subtle shift before anyone else dared to acknowledge it. Group conversations that once flowed effortlessly now carried brief moments of uncomfortable silence whenever Jimin and Jungkook found themselves standing together. Jin attempted to lighten the mood with playful jokes, but even laughter faded more quickly than before. Sugar observed everything without interruption, sensing that forcing answers would only deepen whatever remained hidden. J-Hope tried creating opportunities for everyone to reconnect, believing shared memories could heal unseen wounds. Taehyung, however, watched with growing concern, quietly realizing that both Jimin and Jungkook were suffering for reasons neither of them was willing to reveal. Then another unexpected twist quietly appeared. Anonymous rumors began spreading online, suggesting that tension had grown between the two far beyond ordinary exhaustion. Every article, every edited clip, and every careless comment from strangers added another layer of pressure. Millions of people believed they understood what was happening based on fragments that revealed almost nothing. Neither Jimin nor Jungkook responded publicly, but the silence only fueled more speculation. What had once been a private emotional struggle was slowly becoming a storm that threatened to pull everyone around them into its center. One rainy evening, after another emotionally draining day, fate placed them alone inside an empty practice studio. The room that had once witnessed countless unforgettable memories now felt strangely unfamiliar. The silence between them was louder than the music that had always filled those walls. Jungkook could no longer bear the uncertainty, while Jimin knew the fragile balance he had fought to preserve was only moments away from collapsing. Neither of them realized that the next decision would set into motion the heartbreaking moment that would change both of their lives forever. The storm outside intensified as heavy rain struck the studio windows with relentless force, echoing the turmoil building inside them. The familiar room, once filled with determination and laughter, now felt impossibly cold. Every memory that had strengthened their bond seemed to stand silently between them, reminding them of everything they were about to lose. Jungkook could feel the unanswered questions crushing his patience, while Jimin fought desperately to keep the truth locked away for just a little longer. Neither of them realized that fate had already decided this night would become the turning point they would never forget. Jungkook searched Jimin's face for the warmth that had always comforted him, but all he found was quiet exhaustion hidden behind a practiced smile. That expression frightened him more than anger ever could. It looked like someone who had already accepted losing something precious. The realization sent a wave of panic through his heart. Every instinct urged him to close the growing distance, yet every attempt seemed to push Jimin another step farther away. The silence became unbearable, transforming concern into frustration and fear into painful suspicion. At the same time, Jimin's heart was breaking beneath the weight of a promise no one else knew existed. Days earlier, he had discovered information that could change Jungkook's future forever. Believing that revealing it too soon would destroy everything Jungkook had sacrificed to achieve, Jimin chose to shoulder the burden alone. He convinced himself that temporary pain was better than permanent damage. Every cold expression, every avoided glance, and every moment of distance was carefully planned to protect the person he cared about most. Yet with every passing day, the cost of that sacrifice became harder to endure. Outside the studio, Taehyung had unknowingly begun connecting pieces that everyone else had overlooked. Small inconsistencies, unusual phone calls, and Jimin's repeated disappearances after rehearsals formed a pattern that refused to leave his mind. RM also sensed that something much larger than an ordinary misunderstanding was unfolding, but without proof, he hesitated to interfere. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope could only watch helplessly as two people who had once been inseparable slowly drifted toward an emotional cliff neither seemed capable of escaping. Then everything unraveled in a matter of seconds. Jimin instinctively stepped closer, determined to say something that might finally ease the unbearable tension. But before he could reveal even a fragment of the truth, Jungkook's emotions erupted. Fear disguised itself as anger. Confusion transformed into desperate self-protection. Acting purely on overwhelming emotion instead of reason, Jungkook forcefully pushed Jimin away, believing distance was the only way to stop his own heart from breaking further. Jimin stumbled backward, his balance lost on the rainwater that had been carried inside from the storm. The shock on his face lasted only an instant, yet it carried more pain than words ever could. His eyes held no anger, only profound sadness and quiet acceptance, as though he had expected this moment all along. Without looking back, he turned and disappeared into the relentless rain beyond the studio entrance. The instant Jimin vanished into the darkness, an unbearable feeling settled inside Jungkook's chest. The anger that had controlled him disappeared almost immediately, replaced by a terrifying sense that he had made the worst mistake of his life. And before he could even begin to chase after Jimin, his phone suddenly rang. The message waiting on the other end would reveal that the truth had never been what he believed, and that every second of delay could cost him far more than their friendship. Jungkook's trembling hand barely managed to answer the call before a heavy silence greeted him. There was no panic in the voice that followed, only a painful calm that somehow felt even more frightening. The few words he heard shattered every assumption he had been clinging to for weeks. Jimin had never been pulling away because he had stopped caring. Every step backward had been taken to shield Jungkook from a crisis quietly unfolding behind the scenes, one that Jimin had carried entirely alone without allowing anyone else to share its weight. As the truth slowly emerged, Jungkook felt the room around him collapse beneath the unbearable realization that the person he believed had abandoned him had actually been sacrificing everything for him. His heartbeat became erratic as memories rushed back with brutal clarity. Every unanswered message, every forced smile, every excuse Jimin had given suddenly fit together like fragments of a heartbreaking puzzle. Jungkook remembered the nights Jimin stayed behind after rehearsals, the exhaustion hidden beneath gentle expressions, and the moments when Jimin looked as though he wanted to say something before quietly changing his mind. None of it had been rejection. None of it had been indifference. It had all been silent protection, offered without expecting gratitude or recognition. Unable to remain still for another second, Jungkook sprinted into the rain. The streets were nearly deserted, illuminated only by blurred reflections of city lights shimmering across the soaked pavement. Rain poured relentlessly over him, but he barely noticed. His only thought was finding Jimin before the distance between them became impossible to close. Every passing minute intensified the crushing guilt inside his chest. For the first time, success, fame, and every achievement they had earned together meant absolutely nothing compared to the possibility of losing the person who had quietly stood beside him through every chapter of his life. Meanwhile, Jimin wandered aimlessly beneath the storm, his body growing weaker with every step. The emotional burden he had carried for so long had already drained him, and the painful encounter inside the studio had broken the last piece of strength he had left. Still, he refused to stop. He believed disappearing for a while would spare Jungkook from even greater pain once the entire truth surfaced. The rain concealed the tears that refused to stop falling, allowing him to grieve in complete silence while convincing himself that this loneliness was simply the final price of protecting someone he loved more than himself. Back at the company building, RM, Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, and Taehyung finally learned fragments of the hidden situation that Jimin had concealed from everyone. The realization left each of them speechless. They understood why Jimin had acted so differently, but they also understood something even more devastating. Had the truth been shared just one day earlier, the heartbreaking confrontation might never have happened. Regret spread through the group as they immediately joined the desperate search, each fearing that time was quickly slipping away. Hours passed with no sign of Jimin. Every unanswered phone call deepened Jungkook's panic. Every empty street he searched reminded him of the expression on Jimin's face after the shove, a look not of anger, but of heartbreaking disappointment mixed with quiet forgiveness. That memory haunted him more than anything else. It was the face of someone whose heart had been broken, yet who still refused to blame the person who caused the pain. Then, just as hope began to fade, Taehyung noticed a familiar silhouette sitting alone beneath the dim lights of a quiet riverside walkway. Jimin remained motionless, soaked by the rain, his shoulders trembling from exhaustion rather than the cold. Jungkook froze several steps away, unable to move as overwhelming guilt flooded every part of him. The distance between them was only a few meters, yet emotionally it felt wider than anything either of them had ever faced. And in that fragile silence, Jungkook realized that saying he was sorry would never be enough. The truth Jimin had hidden was still incomplete, and what remained unsaid was about to change both of their lives forever. Jungkook stood frozen as the rain continued to fall between them, each drop seeming to mark another second of regret he could never reclaim. Jimin remained seated on the cold riverside bench, his gaze fixed on the dark water flowing endlessly before him. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the storm. His shoulders, once carrying quiet confidence, now bore the invisible weight of weeks spent protecting everyone except himself. Even from a distance, Jungkook could see how deeply loneliness had settled into him, and the realization struck harder than any accusation ever could. For the first time in a very long while, Jungkook understood that the greatest wounds were often the ones no one could see. Jimin had not needed someone to rescue him from a visible disaster. He had simply needed someone to notice that he was slowly drowning beneath responsibilities, fear, and silent sacrifice. Instead, the one person he trusted most had become the source of his deepest heartbreak. That truth wrapped itself around Jungkook's heart with unbearable force, making every breath feel heavier than the last. As Jungkook slowly approached, another figure emerged from the shadows. Taehyung had followed quietly, stopping several steps behind without interrupting the fragile moment. His expression carried neither judgment nor anger, only sadness born from finally understanding everything Jimin had tried so desperately to hide. Over the previous weeks, Taehyung had uncovered pieces of the mystery one by one. Confidential meetings. Sleepless nights. Documents Jimin had repeatedly refused to let anyone else see. Every clue pointed toward the same heartbreaking reality. Jimin had secretly taken responsibility for a serious mistake committed by someone outside their group during an important project. If the truth had surfaced immediately, Jungkook's reputation would have been dragged into a controversy he had absolutely nothing to do with. Knowing how relentlessly public opinion could destroy years of hard work in a matter of hours, Jimin chose to become the shield. He accepted suspicion, emotional isolation, and endless pressure, believing that protecting Jungkook's future mattered more than protecting his own peace of mind. Very few people knew the complete story. Even RM had only learned fragments after investigating the unusual circumstances. Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope were left stunned by how far Jimin had gone without asking for help. Every burden he carried had been intentional. Every painful smile had concealed another difficult decision. The distance that had confused everyone was never an act of rejection. It was the lonely path of someone convinced that love sometimes meant being misunderstood. When Jungkook finally understood the full extent of Jimin's sacrifice, the memory of pushing him away became almost unbearable. That single moment replayed endlessly in his mind, each repetition revealing details he had missed in the heat of his emotions. Jimin had not tried to defend himself. He had not shown resentment. Instead, his eyes had reflected quiet relief, as though he believed accepting the pain was simply another part of the promise he had made to protect Jungkook until the very end. The rain gradually softened into a gentle drizzle as dawn's first light began to color the horizon. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether two hearts that had survived countless hardships could survive the one misunderstanding that nearly destroyed them. Jungkook knew that regret alone could never heal the damage he had caused. Rebuilding trust would require patience, humility, and the courage to stand beside Jimin through the pain that Jimin had carried alone for far too long. As the first rays of sunlight reflected across the quiet river, Jimin slowly rose to his feet. His expression remained calm, but behind that calmness was the exhaustion of someone who had reached the limit of his strength. The truth had finally come into the open, yet the deepest questions still remained unanswered. Could a bond built over years of unwavering loyalty truly recover after one heartbreaking moment of doubt, or had the cost of silence changed them forever? The answer would shape not only their future together, but the meaning of forgiveness itself. The days that followed moved with an unfamiliar quiet. The frantic search was over, the hidden truth had finally surfaced, and the storm that had driven everyone apart had passed. Yet the emotional aftermath lingered in ways that could not be repaired overnight. Some wounds stopped bleeding long before they stopped hurting, and both Jimin and Jungkook understood they had reached a chapter where actions would matter far more than emotions alone. Jungkook no longer tried to erase what had happened by pretending everything could immediately return to normal. Instead, he chose the far more difficult path of accepting responsibility. Every rehearsal, every meeting, and every ordinary moment became an opportunity to show, rather than prove, that he would never again allow fear to speak louder than trust. He remained close without forcing comfort, offering quiet support whenever Jimin needed it while respecting the space that healing required. Jimin, meanwhile, finally allowed himself to release the burden he had carried for so long. For the first time in weeks, he no longer felt responsible for protecting everyone at the cost of himself. RM gently reminded him that true strength was never measured by how much pain someone could hide. Jin encouraged him to smile without feeling obligated to reassure everyone else first. Sugar spoke little, but his steady presence reminded Jimin that burdens became lighter when shared. J-Hope filled difficult days with warmth that slowly returned laughter to the group, while Taehyung stayed beside both of them, grateful that the truth had arrived before regret became permanent. Little by little, the familiar rhythm of their lives returned. The practice studio that had witnessed their most painful misunderstanding gradually became a place of healing instead of heartbreak. Every step across its floor carried new meaning. They no longer assumed the other person would always understand unspoken feelings. Instead, they learned that even the deepest bond needed honesty to survive. Silence, no matter how well-intentioned, could become the greatest enemy of trust. Jungkook often caught himself remembering the moment he had pushed Jimin away. The memory never disappeared, but over time it transformed from a source of unbearable guilt into a lifelong reminder. It taught him that love built on assumptions could crumble in seconds, while love built on patience could survive even the darkest misunderstanding. Rather than running from that painful memory, he carried it as a promise to never again let fear decide the future of someone he cherished. Jimin also changed in ways few people immediately noticed. The quiet habit of hiding every struggle slowly disappeared. Whenever exhaustion or worry began weighing on him, he no longer convinced himself that facing it alone was an act of kindness. He realized that allowing trusted people to stand beside him was not weakness, it was another form of courage. The walls he had built around his own heart gradually came down, replaced by a deeper understanding that genuine loyalty was never meant to be carried alone. Months later, standing once again beneath bright stage lights surrounded by Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, Taehyung, and Jungkook, the atmosphere felt different. Their smiles were no longer simply expressions for cameras. They carried the quiet confidence of people who had survived one of the hardest emotional trials of their lives together. The audience saw another unforgettable performance, but only the 7 of them understood the invisible journey that had made every moment on that stage far more meaningful than before. Looking across at Jimin, Jungkook no longer saw only the friend who had sacrificed everything for him. He saw someone whose unwavering loyalty deserved to be met with equal trust, openness, and unwavering faith. And Jimin, meeting Jungkook's eyes once more, recognized not the person who had hurt him during one terrible moment, but the person who had chosen to grow because of it. Some stories are remembered because of the pain they contain. Others endure because of what that pain teaches. Their story became both. It proved that misunderstandings can break even the strongest hearts, that silence can create distances words never intended, and that regret arrives far too quickly when trust is replaced by fear. But above all, it revealed something even more powerful, that forgiveness is not forgetting what happened, but choosing to believe that love, honesty, and loyalty are worth rebuilding, one step at a time. And perhaps that is why the bonds that survive their darkest storms become the ones that shine the brightest long after the rain has finally stopped. The years that followed quietly transformed that painful chapter into something neither Jimin nor Jungkook had ever expected. The memory of the night when fear overcame trust never completely disappeared, but it no longer defined their relationship. Instead, it became the foundation upon which they built a stronger understanding of one another. Every challenge that came afterward was faced differently. Whenever uncertainty appeared, neither of them allowed silence to grow long enough to become another misunderstanding. They had learned that even the deepest affection could become fragile if left without honesty. There were still difficult days. The demands of their careers never became lighter, and public expectations remained relentless. Rumors continued to appear from time to time, attempting to create stories that had never existed. But unlike before, those outside voices no longer carried the same power. Jimin and Jungkook had discovered that trust was strongest when it was protected from within rather than validated by the opinions of strangers. Every false rumor they overcame together only reinforced the promise they had silently made after that unforgettable night. Often reflected on how much both of them had matured through adversity. Jin noticed that their smiles had become calmer and more genuine. Sugar admired the quiet resilience that now replaced unnecessary pride. J-Hope celebrated every small moment of laughter that returned naturally instead of being forced. Taehyung, who had witnessed the darkest moments of their misunderstanding, felt grateful each time he saw them standing side by side without hesitation. Their bond no longer depended on perfection. It depended on the willingness to choose each other again, even after experiencing disappointment, fear, and regret. One evening, long after the storm had become nothing more than a distant memory, they returned to the riverside where everything had nearly fallen apart. The water flowed peacefully beneath the fading sunset, completely different from the violent rain that had once surrounded them. The quiet atmosphere carried no sadness this time. It offered perspective. They both realized that life rarely gave people the opportunity to rewrite painful moments. Instead, it offered something even more valuable, the chance to grow because of them. Looking across the calm river, Jungkook understood that the greatest apology had never been spoken aloud. It had been expressed through countless days of patience, consistency, and unwavering support. Jimin also realized that the greatest act of forgiveness had not been forgetting the pain, but allowing his heart to trust again despite remembering it. That silent understanding became more meaningful than any words could have been. As the evening sky slowly darkened, the seven of them walked away together, their footsteps moving in quiet harmony. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring new obstacles, new fears, and new uncertainties. Yet none of them doubted that they would face those challenges differently than before. They had learned that true loyalty is revealed not when life is easy, but when misunderstandings threaten to separate hearts that genuinely care for one another. And so their story became more than a tale of heartbreak. It became a reminder that the people we love most are sometimes the easiest to misunderstand and the hardest to replace. Fear can push someone away in a single second, but courage, honesty, and forgiveness can spend a lifetime bringing them back together. If this story touched your heart, perhaps its greatest message is one worth carrying into your own life. Never let assumptions speak louder than trust, because one moment of doubt can create years of regret, while one moment of understanding can change everything forever. Several months later, life had settled into a quieter rhythm, but some memories never truly faded. They simply became gentler, no longer sharp enough to wound, yet powerful enough to remind everyone how close they had come to losing something irreplaceable. The practice studio echoed once again with determination instead of silence, and the familiar laughter shared among RM, Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, Taehyung, Jimin, and Jungkook carried a sincerity that had been missing for far too long. What they had endured together had reshaped not only their friendship, but also the way they valued every ordinary moment. Jungkook found himself paying attention to details he had once overlooked. He noticed when Jimin appeared unusually quiet after a demanding rehearsal. He recognized the subtle signs of exhaustion hidden behind a reassuring smile. Instead of assuming everything was fine, he chose to stay close, understanding that sometimes silent companionship offered more comfort than any explanation. His greatest lesson had not been about avoiding mistakes. It had been learning that love and loyalty required constant attention, especially during moments when everything appeared perfectly normal. Jimin also embraced a different way of living. The habit of carrying every burden alone slowly disappeared. Whenever pressure began building inside him, he allowed the people who cared about him to share the weight. It was uncomfortable at first, but with each passing day, he discovered something he had forgotten during those lonely weeks. The strongest people were never those who suffered in silence. They were the ones brave enough to trust others with their vulnerability. One afternoon, while sorting through old rehearsal footage, Taehyung accidentally found a recording captured just days before everything had fallen apart. It showed Jimin and Jungkook laughing uncontrollably over a simple mistake during practice, completely unaware of the storm waiting ahead. Everyone gathered around the screen, smiling as forgotten memories filled the room. The recording became more than nostalgia. It reminded them that genuine happiness had always existed beneath the misunderstandings, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. As the video ended, an overwhelming sense of gratitude settled over the group. They realized how easily fear could have rewritten their future forever. One misunderstanding had nearly erased years of trust, yet one difficult truth had ultimately strengthened a bond that might otherwise have remained fragile. No one spoke about that realization aloud. They simply understood it together. From that day forward, the painful chapter was no longer remembered as the night Jungkook pushed Jimin away. Instead, it became the night they all learned that protecting someone should never require sacrificing honesty, and that the people who matter most deserve the truth even when it is frightening. It was a lesson that stayed with each of them, shaping every decision they made afterward. Long after the cameras stopped recording and the lights faded from the stage, one truth remained unchanged. Relationships are not defined by the absence of mistakes. They are defined by the courage to admit them, the patience to heal from them, and the unwavering decision to keep choosing each other despite them. That quiet promise became the invisible thread connecting Jimin and Jungkook through every challenge that followed, proving that even the deepest regret can become the beginning of an even stronger bond when forgiveness leads the way. Years later, when the memory of that rainy night had become a story only the seven of them truly understood, its impact still revealed itself in the smallest moments. It was never spoken about during interviews or celebrated as a triumph. Instead, it quietly lived within every decision they made whenever one of them seemed unusually distant. No one allowed silence to linger without concern anymore. No one assumed that a smile always meant everything was fine. Jimin gradually became the person who encouraged openness instead of quiet endurance. Whenever someone in the group appeared overwhelmed, he gently reminded them that carrying pain alone was not an act of strength. His own experience had taught him that unspoken sacrifices often created misunderstandings far greater than the problems they were meant to solve. The burden he had once hidden became wisdom he freely shared, hoping no one else would repeat the same mistake. Jungkook carried a different lesson. Every time frustration threatened to cloud his judgment, he paused before acting. He remembered how a single emotional impulse had nearly cost him the person he valued most. That memory became his greatest teacher, replacing impatience with understanding. The regret that had once haunted him slowly transformed into quiet discipline, shaping the way he cared for the people around him. RM often watched the two of them with quiet satisfaction.